Well, I get my setup here for doing the nickel plating. I've got everything just about set up now. I don't have the nickel sulfate mixed up yet. I've got water on the stove that's heated up, and I'll bring it in and use this mixing bowl to mix it up with. Got a wooden spoon. I went down and got this container yesterday at the store. It's a tall, narrow container, and because this is a tube that I want to do, I don't want to fill up a whole bucket full of this stuff, so I just want enough to use to do what I need. So I got this is a plastic container. I got a piece of bronze, brass strap here, plate that I had that I've got for a hanger, and I used stainless steel welding rod to make the hangers for that. I've got nickel sheet. This is some real thin stuff here that I got. Nickel is supposed to help block the magnetic fields, and so I got this to wrap around anything that may be interfering with the compass in the airplane. It's pretty thin, about 3 inches wide, and I don't know how long it was, but it was long enough that I cut 2 pieces to fit in that tube, and I have a little bit left over there. This shouldn't hurt that stuff any. It might lose a few nickel ions out of it, but I've just got it folded over that lip there, the top, and hanging down in there, so it should cover both sides of this tube pretty good. And I've got a jumper cable going between both sides here, and to run current or run voltage potential to both of those faces. And got my wall wart here. This was still is a battery charger for AA rechargeable batteries. We never did use it, but the output on it is 3 volts on the adapter and 2.4 volts on the charger. And it took me a little bit to get it figured out. I cut the adapter end of it off, and then I got my voltmeter out and checked the voltage on this. And in this one, it has a white stripe on one wire and the other wire is solid, and it turned out the white stripe wire was the positive and the black one is the negative, or the solid one's the negative. So the negative will get hooked up to this brass bar, and the positive one will get hooked up to the nickel sheet. I had another wall wart there that I found that I could have used, but it puts out 6 volts DC at 500 milliamps, and this one is a lower voltage. I figured it was better. I thought I was going to be able to use this regulated power supply. I thought I could regulate the output of it, but once I got it down and got it out, it's just a 20-25 amp 12 volt DC power supply. You can't adjust it or regulate it. I bought this several years ago to use for electrolysis, for rust removal for electrolysis. I went through several battery chargers doing that, and it's a process that works real well, but I wanted a dedicated power supply for that instead of using battery chargers, and the higher the amperage you have on that, the better, the faster it works. But I saw a little treatise on YouTube that a college put out on doing this electroplating, and the nickel electroplating in particular, and there they said that the nickel molecules or nickel ions release electrons at like 0.5 volts, and this nickel sulfate is a combination of nickel and it's sulfur, and the nickel, like I said, releases its neutrons electrons rather, at a lower voltage, and then at 1.5 or 1.8, something like that, then the sulfur will release its, and then at like 3 or 4, then the water releases its. So the lower voltage actually works better, because if you have a higher flow on there, then you'll start releasing electrons out of the sulfur, and then that'll start attracting to whatever you're going to coat, and that'll cause a dull coat or blisters, something like that. So your lower voltage is actually better. Whereas on electrolysis for rust removal. The higher the amperage, the better. Well, I wasn't sure how to mix this stuff, how much to mix in or anything like that. I'm not sure. This must be a couple quarts in this mixing bowl. Well, I've got some boiling water and I put in this mixing bowl and I started dumping that nickel sulfate in it, and I had a pound of it and I figured I'd use part of that. Well, I wound up using all of it, and I figured, the higher the solution is there, since it takes a nickel out of this solution and deposits it onto whatever you're coating, the higher the solution in this liquid, the better. And then it takes the nickel off of those sheets, the cathodes that you put in there. Takes them off there to replace what you use out of the solution. So anyway, the more saturated the solution is, the better. And so I figured I'd mix it in there until I quit getting it to dissolve in the solution. I used hot water, mixed it in there a little at a time, and just kept stirring it. And I wound up using the whole 1 pound, and it's still dissolved in the solution. So I could have used more for that much solution. Anyway, I've got myself a funnel cleaned out there to pour it into, and we'll decant it into that container. Well, I've got the process started, I hope. I've got the solution in my container, and I didn't have quite enough solution to fill the container up. I probably could have lengthened out my hanger for that tube and dropped it down in there farther. So I wound up putting a little bit more water in there. It's sitting there cooking now. I do see bubbles coming out of it. There are bubbles coming off of that foil, that nickel foil. But I don't know whether they're actually from any reaction going on in there, or whether it's just bubbles coming off from the liquid going in there. I just got done pouring it in there, and you always have a little bit of air that's trapped on the surfaces from surface tension that come off in bubbles over time. The only thing we can do now is give it time, let it sit in there and cook. We'll pull that out of there and look at that. I don't know how long that's supposed to sit in there, but it's been 3 hours. When I take this out and look, you can see, well, the top is black, and that's just happened in the last little bit. At first it was just black around the top of it up there. I don't know whether I didn't get that solution stirred up enough. I had to add some water to it after I put it in there to get the solution up high enough to cover everything. And I took it out, and it was a little black around the top, and I stirred it up and I put it back in. Now the black is following farther down. I've got little black spots all over it, little nodules. When I wipe those off, it turns out that those are just nodules of nickel. I'm going to go ahead and wash this off and polish it up a little bit tomorrow and see how it looks. This isn't, the intent on this is not to make it pretty anyway. It's just to put a nickel coating on it to help keep it from rusting. I may have to start over again on that. I don't know. We'll see how it looks. Well, I'm going to chalk my first attempt at nickel plating up as a fail. I did get some nickel plating on this. Some of it looks pretty good here. Looks pretty good, but then there's speckles all over, along through a lot of it, down here at the bottom and up here, and then up the top, the last 2 inches or so from the top, you can kind of see it looks like it kind of ran down, but it had black on it, and when I rubbed that off, it's just down to the bare metal. So I think I'm going to take this piece over to the hanger and put it in the lathe and polish it up again, and then I'm going to try it again. Well, I took this over to the hanger and put it on the lathe and took some emery cloth and polished it up, and I got to say that this is not a fail at all. This is a good nickel coating on there. It polished up just beautiful, and even up here on the top where I thought that it didn't get in, that's a coating on there. I could tell for sure because I had 2 little spots here, one here and then one up here, where it flaked off for some reason when I was polishing it. So and you can see the There's just a slight difference between the chrome moly polished underneath that and the nickel. Here you can hardly tell even that it's there. There's one spot right there, and there's a bigger spot right there. But all in all, there's a little spot right up in there. All in all, it turned out pretty good. I went ahead and polished it down a little bit more than probably I needed to, just to get these two spots here smoothed out. Well, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up and pickle it, like I said, and I'm going to go ahead and hang it in there one more time for a few minutes and see if I can't get these two spots that flaked off there where I peeled it off to stick on there, but put another little coat on there. Alright, I took some 3/8 inch OD, 1/8 inch ID Tygon tubing, and I just pressed it in. I had to do a little whittling on it to get it to fit in there, but I just pressed it in a quick connector, hooked it up to my air line, and I turned the air regulator down to 0, and then just slowly turned it up till I get a little bit of bubbling going on in there. And that's just a little bit, but that should be enough to keep that agitated, to stir that up. Anyway, we'll see if that helps. And I've got my tube cleaned up, and I just washed it down with alcohol. I'll put my gloves on, and I'll wash it down again. Well, I'm going to make up another hanger for it out of stainless steel, and set that in it. Then I'll wash everything down again with alcohol, wash it off with hot water, and then dip it in my acid tank for a little bit, and then we'll wash it again with hot water, and we'll stick it in this bubbling vat of green goo. Well, after dipping that, I washed it with alcohol and then went out and dipped it in the muriatic acid bath, and after doing that, you can definitely see where the nickel is and where the chrome moly is. The chrome moly turned out dull in there, so we've got nickel on there. And then I flushed that off with boiling water, and then just to make sure that it wasn't the water droplets on there that caused the problem, I took the torch and dried that all off, and that would also have the effect of ouch, that's hot. Also have the effect of burning anything off of there that might be on there, like any lint or anything like that. Now, yesterday I put that on at 4:30 p.m., let it run until 7:30 p.m., so it was 3 hours. And after looking at some of the videos and stuff online, that might have been just a little bit too long. They had anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour on what the recommended was on there. So anyway, I'll stick it in there, and I won't do it as long this time. Well, I'm going to pull this out. It's been longer than I intended. It's been an hour and a half. I started to pull it out earlier, and I didn't think it was done enough yet. It hadn't, and I had to go to town. So there we go. Now it's coated pretty uniform around there. Looks like it anyway. But still got all those little nodules all over it. And that was pretty well cleaned this time. I made sure there was nothing on it, on the surface, to attract anything. So I think that's just 3 volts with those great big... Yes! 3 volts with those great big cathodes on there. It just lets it too efficient on there, I think. That doesn't look too bad, considering. See, there's a lot of black stuff on there, but I put that on the lathe and run a little piece of crocus cloth around that, and that should polish up. And I don't care what it looks like. It's only on there for the corrosion resistance on it. Well, I took this tube out to the hanger, put it on the lathe, and took a wore out piece of emery cloth and polished it up a little bit, knocked those high spots off, and it polished up pretty good. There's still some rough spots on it and stuff. It'd take a lot more work to get it down smooth. For some reason that deposited a lot of lumps and bumps on there and spots. I'd say most of them knocked off, but that's a pretty good finish. And that's as good as I'm going to do with this piece. It did work, got nickel on there, and that should do what I wanted, keep it from rusting. Put a little bit of lubricant on there and stuff to protect it. I think I'm going to go ahead and clean up the inside of that tube with a wire brush a little bit, and then I'll tape this outside up and powder coat the inside. I'd turned this down so that I could powder coat it and have it powder coated in there, but I wasn't really sure I wanted to. I powder coated the flap handle inside, and if I powder coated this, I might get it a little bit too thick. It might interfere. It might not pivot real well. It might. Anyway, this is a nickel finish on there. It'll work hopefully, and it doesn't build it up too much that it's going to cause it to be stiff on that flap handle. Well, I'll go ahead and clean up the inside of it and powder coat it, and then it'll be finished.